Hello Internet, I'm Jackie Fox, and when I started playing this game, my first and favorite tank was Kilphe. I don't think I stopped using her in my compositions until probably King Mont came out and I pulled him. So this is a huge sentimental favorite and was the backbone of a lot of my early compositions. I really love her as a unit, but she is a first generation unit and she is kind of showing her age. I am going to make it my mission in this video because I think that there's a lot of YouTube content creators that have a sentimental favorite from when they started playing that may not have even been good then, they just like them, or may not be good now and they still kind of hold a candle for them. Well, for me, this is going to be both of the iterations of Kilphe because I used both of them. I love what both of them do. I love how they interact with the meta, and specifically, I love how both of them interact with tanks, typically. So when I first started playing the Kilphe strategy, she didn't have as many good buffs, so you're probably getting off something like Winged Staff, which gives her extra movement, also getting her barrier up, and usually she could do both of those things. She's a little bit slow, but all tanks were at the time. I mean, like, the best tank was Engelbert, and he is god-awful slow, even compared to her. So with that extra movement and all of that, she would get to the front lines pretty fast. If you timed the rest of your team to stay behind her, then often an interaction you could end up with if the opposite team was set up well is that you have what's typically a physical tank like Engelbert, and you have Kilphe, who is also a physical tank but a magic damage dealing one. Their tank does next to no damage. It's not a DPS to begin with. They weren't going to do a lot of damage as it was, but also very resistant to what they're doing, just scratching her, basically. And then she energy blasters them off the field in about 2 hits, which was really incredible for Engelbert at the time. So she just had an incredible meta matchup, even though on paper she's kind of a Jacqueline of all trades in that she does a little bit of everything, but she doesn't do any of it well. The one thing I would say that she did do particularly well was being able to, maybe not say tank because that implies hate generation, but her ability to survive physical, especially physical / damage because of her resistances. And that is definitely getting increased. She is doubling down on that into her 140 with an additional 20 defense. So that's pretty big for her, especially when you start adding her buffs into that. It just gives her a really high defensive starting point. So with units that are older that maybe only have 20 defense penetration or maybe 40 because you have them equipped with an extra 20, or units that, even newer units, second generation units that maybe have 40 in their kit somewhere, and you can get them up to 60 with equipment. The thing she's really going to struggle with is the newer ones that can get up to 80 or 100 because they're just going to ignore 100% of how she's trying to stay alive, which is mostly going to be through that defense. She does have a ton of other things. She has both a dedicated physical barrier and a dedicated magical barrier. For that magical barrier, you have to be running her Spellblade subjob, which is also the place that she gets kind of a long range move with hate in. It being long range can be a little bit of a drawback because she didn't have as many buff turns, and that was more important then than it is now, because her 120, which she got in the second generation, I think personally, I didn't see a lot of people using Kilphe, but I was using her very regularly during second generation after that update to her. And the reason that I think that it worked so particularly well was that, you know, a lot of the things that she really needed to modernize up into being a second generation unit, she got off of her 120 buff. Now, when this originally came out for her, it only did 3 things. I know it doesn't look like that on wotv calc, but they don't show you the upgrades that came from job upgrades. And she did get a very specific job upgrade for her 120 skill. But it started out with magic attack 25 for self, which is just a pretty huge buff. I mean, like, earlier this week, we were talking about Ruinstern getting 10 slash attack on his 140 upgrade. which is nice for a damage dealer, but this is 25. It makes up for the fact that she wasn't necessarily a high damage unit and that she was maybe made to be a little bit more of a tank support, so this is giving her more opportunities for damage. Also, decrease AP consumption. Being a mage, she doesn't have AP problems to begin with, but this just makes her able to go forever if she needs to, or at least her first couple of turns don't eat away at her AP very quickly, which makes her a lot easier to sustain in consistently dealing damage if she has to. And 20 more defense. Or, well, 20 defense, because, you know, the more is coming from a 140, and I'm talking about how she existed in the 120 era. So this all kind of brought her back up to par in a lot of ways, and it was just an amazing buff. It meant that you could turn off those other buffs, which kind of limited her movement a little bit, but by this point you had more ways to make her faster, so that's not as much of a problem. You can still get her out in front. But also, I think in this era, I liked having her a little bit more behind and playing the white mage, whereas I had used her as a tank more as a first generation unit. Now I'm using her a little bit more as a support that can come in and swing for damage when she needs to. Then with job upgrades, she got the ability to absorb 30% of damage done for 3 turns. So when you combine that with the fact that her AP consumption is down, she can use massive attacks. She can land her LB without using a ton of AP to do it. She's got 25 magic attack up. That's just a huge increase to the modifier. I mean, the way that works, from my understanding, is that adds on to the modifier additively at a rate of 1 to 100. So like 1%. So you could see it as 25% plus on the mod, okay, so let's say the mod is 200 and it's a magic attack. This would change that mod to 225. That's my understanding. So I did make a little bit of a mistake in her short, because I think that increasing magic damage, I could be wrong, because sometimes this game uses percentage and just plus interchangeably. And the mathematics for how damage calculation works can be a little bit obscure sometimes and just a little bit counterintuitive. But I think that what this does is it is an additional modifier happening after the modifier, if that makes sense. So if it's a 200% modifier, let's say that this isn't on, just for ease of math, right? And you have that 10% magical damage up from her 140, then it would be doing 220. It would be giving you 10% of what you already had in addition, instead of just 10 more, if that makes sense. So I think that, you know, with the average mod, like even a small mod's 121, so that would be 12 instead of 10. So I think that it is arguably better all across the board, actually, than his upgrade. But not only that, it scales incredibly well with higher damage attacks. And now, in addition to that, because honestly, I think in this meta, unless she's doing a lot of damage, it's hard for that absorb HP to really give her back what she can take in one turn, especially versus newer opponents. But giving her 40 spirit penetration, which is absolutely a thing that she needed. She didn't need it when she first came out, really, but she absolutely does now, especially with, you know, things like her 120 skill at its very beginning with the attack and the AP consumption, but also now with the absorb damage done. The more consistently she can do damage to heal herself, the better she's going to stay on the board. And now that we're in a meta where it's easy through equipment and all sorts of strategies that we didn't have in the first generation to add a bunch of spirit to your units, just if you are dealing magic damage, you need a certain amount of spirit penetration just to deal with the fact that everybody has a certain amount of spirit. So I think that this is actually a really good upgrade for her, in that it already stacks into they're putting all of the eggs in one basket in the best kind of way. I've complained about this with upgrades for other units, but I think that it's actually really incredible in this case, because unlike stacking a lot of effects onto re-raise or something like that, there's not a single point of dispel for this. I guess removing a general dispel would probably remove the spirit penetration, the defense. I'm not sure how absorbing damage works with that. I Actually, you know what? A General Dispel would probably deal with a lot of this. Again, not sure how they absorb HP. Probably the rest of it, though. So she would be kind of weak to Dispel, and I also think that kind of in how I noted that unless she's built to be particularly evasive, Yuffie can have troubles in matches that last more than, say, 4 to 5 turns because she runs out of Brumal Form, and then that Mirage Shield goes, and then she just starts taking damage from everybody because she's not super evasive by herself, and you have to be really evasive to be consistent in the current meta with all the high accuracy units running around. In that same way, I think that Kilphe is going to run into issues where the fight really goes long. Even though she has maybe potential to sustain to that point, I think the match is going to get a lot harder for her after that point. And I can't even think of a good scenario where she might want to reapply this buff where she could actually work like that, but I would probably turn her other buffs off, like just run this so that she doesn't get any other option than using this, because like she has other good buffs, but woo boy, this is so much better than all of them. So if you're playing against Kilphe, you want to probably stall her out. You want to bring a support or a healer of your own, somebody who can keep your units in the game, because the longer you can have her fight, the worse she's going to get, because once this buff wears off, she's going to fall off fairly hard because she hasn't gotten a lot of really super impactful upgrades outside of this. That being said, with her being a bulkier unit, with her being a unit that was intended to be a tank, with her also being a unit that can build up a lot of lightning resistance for specifically offensive matchups, she may not be great on defense, but she can definitely do some work, even probably to this day, on offense. I just have a completely different strategy. It doesn't really fit her in anymore for what I do with Earth, but I think that she could work in a versus lightning setup because she can build really high lightning resistance. That's another thing that's pretty great for her. But, you know, in a more general setup, I think she kind of fails when the match goes long, or when she has a lot of opponents that are running Dispels, because yeah, I think a lot of this actually probably could get dispelled all at once. The only thing I'm not sure about is the absorb HP, but that probably counts as a dispellable buff as well. I think pretty much everything else here is. But at the same time, I'm tiny penis. And then they had to slam on brakes at a stoplight, a stop sign, and then gun it again. Just the smallest of penises. But you know who does have some big dick energy? Definitely Kilphe. Also, being a Spellblade, having Lightning Killer, and slash-based attacks, just in case they have magic attack resistance, you can get around that. That can also work in her favor, even though these are really close range. But again, she really does like getting up in people's faces. So maybe if you wanted to work one more buff into this, there's a lot of TMRs that have an improved version of the buff that I was talking about for Hertz Winged Staff. So, you know, if you're not trying to run her as a tank necessarily, although you do kind of want her to take a certain amount of damage maybe, but you'll probably get it in AoE even with negative hate. Maybe like Katone's TMR, it would certainly make her a lot faster. It would give her the additional mobility. It would give her hate down, which would be interesting, especially if she's running White Mage. It's great to have negative hate on your supports, especially if they aren't attacking a lot, although she will be, but it'll be enough negative hate that she shouldn't be drawing attacks for 3 or 4 hits anyways, and if she throws a heal in every once in a while, then even less than that, or even more. The negative hate will probably outlast her other buff. It depends on how much room she has for buffs, and just keep in mind that giving her 1 extra move is probably going to give her less room to get buffs off. But I think at this point in the game, there are other things that do that. I want to say like Valentine's Ildira may do that, and instead of hate down, it would give haste. So this would probably make her a much better brawler, and maybe she uses her turns more effectively to wipe people out and not get wiped herself. This way, So this would work better with more of a brawlery Kilphe than a support. So you have a couple of ways to go, but I think giving her increased ability to just get in people's faces through extra movement is important, because this day and age you just aren't running winged staff. It hasn't been upgraded. It doesn't really do anything extra that's special. It is a kind of a waste of a buff, and that's really unfortunate because it is something that really helps her out. It just feels kind of underpowered that that's all it does, and there's a lot of ways that you could add a similar buff with extra effects that could be pretty impactful by going with a TMR. But also another way to go, again, because she is kind of a close range unit, also Mashari's TMR, just any high magic unit. I love that TMR on, but it's great on her because it also gives her a physical magical barrier. That's pretty cool. So that's always going to land on her, a little bit of an extra heal, and also kind of a way to, because she's not going to be using this right off in most fights, although she may definitely use it early on in Fight 2 in Guild Wars. This is going to give her a way that her AI might respect to reapply some sort of buffs to herself. So this might make her a little bit more sustainable and viable into the long game. So that's an interesting option for TMR. But it's especially interesting to give her better heals than Curata. It's not the best. It is good. It is okay for spot healing, but it's really just not necessarily what you want for healing. So giving her a TMR with a better healing buff and maybe running Spellblade, even Staff Mage, because she gets the Staff Mage equivalent of Earthrending Pain, which allows her to move to target panel. Again, she likes getting up in people's faces. This could be another way to do that. This also allows you to, again, this gives you an alternative to running that movement up on her TMR by giving her this Staff Mage sub. I usually don't really recommend that, and I don't like the confusion skill that's in here. I mean, I would say on other units that I guess it works against evasion, but she has an instant casting guaranteed hit AoE with 4 casts. I don't think she's ever really gonna run into, and her main buff has AP consumption down. I don't necessarily think she's ever gonna run into a situation where she can't hit something and has to confuse them instead. So that sub job does kind of feel like a waste, but if you have a healing coming from somewhere else, then you can definitely make that work. I would also say if you have healing coming from somewhere else, you could maybe turn her into more of a tank with Spellblade, but you know, she's kind of the opposite of Dwayne in some ways, that like she had hate when she was relevant to be a tank, whereas we wanted, I mean, Dwayne had hate through a passive, so like he kind of functioned the same way, kinda. It wasn't ideal for either of them really. They were both pseudo tanks, but like, I think for both of them, it's a little scary to use Dwayne as your tank these days, even though he is technically more of a tank than he ever was, in terms of hate generation and consistency in hate generation. He just arguably feels less durable now than he ever did. The same's kind of true for her. So taunting spell can be, I think, a more of a liability these days for her, and not just in that she might not stand up well to the hate, but also because it's a long range skill that, depending on kind of what buff pattern you're running, might take up a turn that she would otherwise use for buffing with a skill that only has a 121 mod, you know? So it's not even like she's slapping them really hard. She's just getting in cheap range damage, and if you're not necessarily even happy with her getting the hate, there's just not a huge upside to that in general. So all of that is kind of how I would play her, some of the strategies that I would use with her, but there's certainly other options that you could go for. You could play into another support strategy that would make her faster with Ayaka's boots. That would, I want to say that that's one of the best ways to get agility with an agility set in the runes. I think you can get like 10 agility on that. and that's going to give her like a barrier with Asuna. I don't know how often that's really going to come up that she would actually use that, which is a blessing and a curse, because you don't have to worry about her using it instead of another buff that you might want on a shorter map. She'll only use it when she needs to, but also she'll only use it when she needs to, and that might not be super often. And also, if your Asuna unit is the one that gets the status and it's something like Confusion, well, you're just kind of screwed anyways, and those tend to be the worst. But having the opponent's team landing a status effect on one of your allies trigger you to put a barrier on yourself and them and cure that would be cool. And another way to give her some of the plus sides of running White Mage and let her play into some of those natural strengths without actually putting her into White Mage, and being able to use some of her other abilities so that, you know, she has more options. Now, naturally, anytime you get a character that has just a huge kit full of possibilities, they tend to have AI problems. It's a little bit of the Aerith curse. It's certainly not nearly as bad for Kilphe, because she does what she's set up to do, and you largely choose what she's set up to do through her sub jobs. But I think it really does kind of require a little bit of introspection into, what am I trying to fight? How would I best go about that? How could I best utilize Kilphe for that, and what I should avoid with her? And you know, what sub job's going to help me with that? What TMR fills in a thing that I feel like I need with her? What TMR allows her to apply a buff mid-game? You know, lots of questions like that become important with her. And just to finish things off, because I'm just noticing that it got a pretty significant upgrade. This was also a part, I believe, of the job upgrades. So she always had a decreased magic resistance 38 for 3 turns on a relatively close range LB. Pretty big modifier on this, 200%, so it's going to double whatever magic stat and whatever other kind of things you've got going on. That's pretty hefty. But now she can do that not only once but twice, and it's going to spell auto revive while it's doing it. So wow. You don't usually see limit breaks get this much love. Like, with a lot of them, if they're going to upgrade them, they give it one more cast, or they give it the ability to do something extra and impactful. They don't usually do both, and this skill got both. And while it is less true now that there aren't a lot of ways of reducing magic attack resistance, there still aren't a whole lot of them. So it is still kind of special, and she could work into maybe PvE compositions, especially like in Earth. There definitely isn't a way to do this in Earth if you're, I guess you're, well, no, that wouldn't chain. I don't know. Yeah, this used to be relevant in the more rainbow days to PvE content, but it's definitely not the best strategy now. But it is kind of important for a more magical team if she were on one in the future, maybe a job-based team that was a little bit more had a little bit more variety. This would be a good way to benefit everyone on the team, as opposed to a unit like Queen Macherie, who is going to use her LB more as a cheerleader for Earth, but not really going to be able to do as much to benefit a rainbow team. So that is a pretty thorough deep dive into Kilphe as a unit. Let me just get one more chance to look over her kit. Physical Barrier did actually get a cool upgrade that increases single target resistance by 20 for herself, in addition to being a 50% barrier. So that's good. That could be, if you're not using like a TMR buff, like that increases your movement, as I suggested, this could be a good second buff on maps that you have enough room. But if you only have room for one buff, you're definitely using the 120. Staff of Augmentation is 100% where it's at. But another thing that might come up, that might become important, that is in her kit, is that she can deal light damage through her White Mage sub-job. It is a 220 mod, so it's massive. It has good range, it's light magic damage, and it's guaranteed hit. So Holy can be impactful. Generally speaking, though, Energy Buster, which has just a big old AoE pattern. And I want to say that Holy, I'm pretty sure Holy has a cast time. This did originally too, but that was removed in its upgrade. Yeah, no, Holy does have a cast time. So you're gonna have better guaranteed hit options. You've got 4 casts here. You're probably not running out of that, but it is worth mentioning. But I think really its value in her kit is almost certainly that, you know, a lot of units these days get non-elemental attacks to be able to kind of have a natural way of bypassing elemental resistances. So I think what's actually more impactful than the guaranteed hit is the fact that this is a light attack on an earth unit that other people might not be expecting, because let's face it, people aren't expecting Kilphe. At this point in 2023, nobody is expecting to run into a Kilphe in like arena or in guild battle, so they're not really prepared for the fact that she might slap them with light damage. So if they're building more exclusively for earth resistance, which is a pretty good way to wall Bradley, and unless you have like a Queen Ma Cherie, there isn't a great way around this for earth teams. Well, actually there kind of is, although I wouldn't super rely on this, but it does give her another option if they have high earth resistance. So with all of that being said, this has been a really exhaustive look at what I love about Kilphe, her weaknesses, her strengths, just an honest overview of how she can be used. Because like even first generation units, while I wouldn't necessarily advise you investing a ton in them unless they just start burying us in UR scrolls, she's not unusable. And there are definitely ways to take the things that she got in her 140 upgrade, maybe not like giving her additional reincarnations, but at least taking her to 140, there are ways to use those bonuses to make her a better unit, and to at least make her useful in offensive formats where you can pick your opponents. Even though she might be a little bit more of a liability versus specific strategies or specifically newer teams. So, I hope that's everything you need to know about Kilphe. If you have any other questions about this unit or the summer version, who I hope is getting an upgrade very soon, especially, I don't know, Addison Rae's looking kind of swimsuity, so like maybe it's swimsuit season. Addison Rae's kicking it off, and then we're gonna get all of our beach units getting a 140 upgrade. If you have any questions about any of those things, you can hit me up in the comments. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe, especially if you're still watching. If you watched this bad boy all the way to the end, I think I deserve it. Don't you? Come on, please. It's only gonna take a second. And, you know, comment. Check out the link tree in my description. I have a whole media empire. I write books, podcasts, I do non-gaming videos, I do a little bit of everything, and I'm trying to make it through life as an artist, which is difficult, so give me all the support you can, or just check out the other projects and see what you're into. All of that will be in the link tree, and as always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.